You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode number 63 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. Since the recording I had scheduled for this week got pushed back a few days, I am going to be sharing an episode on Joe and Charlie, The Big Book Comes Alive, on Step 4, where they're actually talking a little bit about Step 4 out of the 12 and 12, that's 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. In episode 62, where I was talking with John M., he and I covered a bunch of different steps, and when I started talking about Step 4, I talked about how this recording is really what turned around my understanding around how to do Step 4. So when talking about doing a resentment grid, the first two columns are the name of the person or institution that we have a resentment against. And the second column is what they did. The third column is called affected my, or what part of self was affected. And this was really confusing to me. So I did want to see what I could do to cover Joe and Charlie's explanation on this. And I have talked about Joe and Charlie here on the podcast. On episode 17 with LJ, at the end, I did talk about the Joe and Charlie Big Book Comes Alive and how they are historians of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and go around speaking at different groups. When looking at this recording, I tried to find who owned the copyright on this and could not find any detailed information. I see it spread all over the recovery community, so I'm hoping that it is okay to share here on the podcast. And if I find later that it is violating any copyright, I will quickly pull this. Anyway, before they start to get into detailed discussion on how to work Step 4, they do talk about some background that comes from the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, and so I wanted to do a reading from that. And this is on pages 42 and 43 of the 12 and 12. And again, Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there were no social instinct, if men cared nothing for the society of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for the sex relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often far exceed their proper functions. Powerfully, blindly, and many times subtly, they drive us, dominate us, and insist upon ruling our lives. Our desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society often tyrannize us. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. When that happens, our great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities. Step 4 is our vigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities in each of us have been and are. We want to find exactly how, when, and where our natural desires have warped us. We wish to look squarely at the unhappiness this has caused others and ourselves. By discovering what our emotional deformities are, we can move toward their correction. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment for us. Without a searching and fearless moral inventory, most of us have found that the faith which really works in daily living is still out of reach. Before tackling the inventory problem in detail, let's have a closer look at what the basic problem is. Simple examples like the following take on a world of meaning when we think about them. Suppose a person places sex desire ahead of everything else. In such a case, this imperious urge can destroy his chances for material and emotional security as well as his standing in the community. Another may develop as such an obsession for financial security that he wants to do nothing but hoard money. Going to the extreme, he can become a miser or even a recluse who denies himself both family and friends. Nor is the quest for security always expressed in terms of money. How frequently we see a frightened human being determined to depend completely upon a stronger person for guidance and protection. This weak one, failing to meet life's responsibilities with his own resources, never grows up. Disillusionment and helplessness are his lot. In time, all his protectors either flee or die, and he is once more left alone and afraid. And I'm going to leave it there. There's so much information in the 12 and 12. Originally, when I thought about doing this episode, I thought about just playing some short segments. And upon listening to it again, I found a section that I wanted to play in its entirety. It's about 25 minutes long. And like I mentioned, I'm not sure if there is any copyright on this recording. I have seen it posted at multiple recovery websites, podcasts, YouTube channels. So anyway, I feel that this is an okay thing to share, and it has helped me and a lot of my sponsees on how to work step 4. Again, the section that we're looking at is the third column, what part of self is affected, or in the big book, it says affects my. So looking at a resentment grid inventory, the first column would be the name, the second column would be what they did, the third column being what part of self is affected, and the fourth column, which we'll get to in another episode, is called what's my part in it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joe and Charlie in progress. And again, this is them talking about the end of step 3 and talking about the beginning of step 4. I hope you enjoy it. Here it is.
Before we start into step 4, we're going to look at a little piece of information that comes out of the 12 and 12. And the reason we want to look at it is, as you know, Bill wrote the 12 and 12 approximately 13 years after he wrote the big book. And I think we need to face the fact that when Bill wrote the big book, Bill was not a great spiritual giant. He was not a great student of human nature. He was a night school lawyer. He was a New York City stock speculator. But when he wrote the big book, he was able to write one of the most spiritual books dealing with human nature the world's ever seen. Surely God used Bill's hand to write the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. 13 years later, he made a decision to write the 12 and 12. Always been a lot of discussion in AA as to why did he ever write it. 2 or 3 reasons, I'm sure. One is he'd been trying for years to sell the traditions to the fellowship, and the fellowship really didn't want them. And I think he felt if he could put the traditions together in a book with the steps, that traditions would be more acceptable then to the fellowship. But I think the real reason he wanted to do it is he knew more about what he was talking about in 1951, 52, and 53 than he did back in 1937, 38, and 39. He had worked with some of the greatest spiritual minds in the United States. He had talked with some of the greatest psychiatric minds in the United States. He had worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of alcoholics. And I think he felt that he had more information to give us, that if we could accept it and understand it, that it would make it easier for us to work the program out of the big book Alcoholics Anonymous. We do not think the 12 and 12 was meant to replace the big book. You can't work the steps out of the 12 and 12. And the reason you can't is because there's no directions in there. And that's why a lot of people really love it. Because they can get in it and dance around and philosophize and never have to do anything at all. But there's some information in there that if we see it and understand it, it's going to make it easier to work the steps. And in the 12 and 12, he talks about, and actually it's in step 4, about the first 2 or 3 pages, he talks about the 3 basic instincts of life, which are God-given, and that they're absolutely necessary for survival of the human race. Let's take a look at them for just a few minutes. It'll really show why we need to take step 3, and it's going to set us up with some information that we need for step 4. Joe, you want to put that on the screen?
This coffee, you mean? Oh.
And of course, you got a picture now to match this in your handout sheet. And Bill tells us there that all human beings are born with these 3 basic instincts of life, that they are God-given, they are absolutely necessary for survival of the human race, and therefore they are good things. He talks about the social instinct, the security instinct, and the sex instinct. Yeah. My feelings exactly. And under the social instinct, he said all human beings are born with a desire to be liked, to be accepted, to be respected by other people. He said all human beings are born with a desire to come together in groups with other human beings. And he said if we didn't have those desires, if we cared nothing about each other, that the world would go into a complete dog-eat-dog situation, complete anarchy would reign, and under those conditions the human race would simply fail to survive. So those feelings that you and I have, to be liked, to be accepted, to be respected, to come together in groups with other human beings, they are good, God-given things, and therefore they are good. He uses several terms under that social instinct. He uses the word companionship, and that's nothing more than wanting to belong or to be accepted by other people. So many of us grew up on the outside of the crowd looking in, wanted to be a part of and knew we could not be, and knew that whatever we said, whatever we did would be wrong and people would laugh and we would be embarrassed, and always scared to death with what other people thought of us. He uses the term prestige. Prestige is wanting to be recognized or be accepted as the leader of the group. And the world needs leaders. Somebody has to make decisions. I guess even in the old caveman days, somebody had to say, Jewel, get behind that tree with your spear. Billy Jack, you get behind that bush with your club. And Mary Jo and I'll run this sucker through here and we'll have something to eat. Somebody has to do that. And most people will take one of 2 directions. Either let me be a part of, or let me be the leader of. And in either case, it's going to be based upon what other people think of us. If they like us and accept us, we can become those things. Bill said it in his story. The great drive for success was on. I'd prove to the world I'm important. Self-esteem. Self-esteem is what we think of ourselves. And it's either usually too high or too low, one of the two. And it's usually based upon what other people think of us or what we think other people think of us. And if they like us and accept us and respect us, then we feel pretty good toward ourselves. If they don't, we feel pretty lousy toward ourselves. Pride. And I'm glad I got in the habit of going to the dictionary. I always thought pride was something you're supposed to have. As a young boy growing up, all I ever wanted to be was a man who walked tall with pride and a little bit sideways like John Wayne did. That's all I ever wanted to be. But the dictionary defines it as an excessive and unjustified opinion of oneself. It's either too high or too low. It's very seldom the truth. Personal relationships are relations with the world, other human beings and the world around us. Ambitions are our plans for the future to gain acceptance, power, recognition, prestige, and etc. All human beings have these feelings. Now, if we want to be liked and accepted and respected by the world and the people in it, the first thing we got to do is decide, well, what is it we need to do? What is it we need to become? And society teaches us these things as we grow up. And as we watch the adults and we see what they do and we read about things, then we, in turn, begin to set goals for ourselves. And we write up a little script in our head as to what we're going to become and what we're going to do. And it'll vary in different parts of the world. One part of the world is to have a good education. Another part of the world is to be a large landowner. Another part of the world is to have a big family. Another part of the world is to be a good fisherman. It could be any number of things. And as we grow up, we determine what we're going to become. And we begin to set goals, and we begin to work toward the completion of those goals. And as we work toward the completion of those goals, we're going to have to work at it. You can't just be a bum and sit on your duff and have people like you and accept you and respect you. At the same token, we're going to have to make some sacrifices. There are some things that I would really like to do as a human being that are very exciting and very pleasurable. But if I do them and you catch me at it, you're not going to like me at all. And I don't think you and I would do the work necessary to reach the goal, nor make the sacrifices necessary to be acceptable, unless we got a reward for doing so. And the great reward comes at the moment of successful completion of the goal. How many of us have set that goal for the education, for the new business, whatever it might be, and we work and we work and we strive and we strive, and the day we become successful and they pat us on the back and they say, "Oh, Joe, you're a fine fellow, you're a great man, you're really a smart individual," and we get that praise and recognition, and there's a feeling that comes over us which really is one of those indescribably wonderful feelings. The only thing wrong with it, though, it seems to be just a temporary feeling. You no sooner reach the goal, you get the praise, you get the recognition, it feels great, and then you look around and you say, "Well, is this all there is to it?" And you set another goal. And you work and you work and you strive and you strive and you reach the new goal and you get the praise and the power and the recognition that comes with it, but it doesn't last long, and you set another goal. And it seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more recognition, more and more acceptance, more and more power, and we're not getting it fast enough, not giving it to us the way we think they ought to. So what do? Well, we start taking shortcuts. We start doing a little lying, a little conning, a little manipulating, a little stepping on other people's toes and climbing on their backs. And the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for others. They retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. The book says it's plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success, because under those conditions we're always in collision with people, places, and things. Second basic instinct is the security instinct. Now, I know in AA we try to live one day at a time, But I also noticed about everybody in this room's got an insurance policy. And the purpose of the insurance policy is to protect ourselves in the future. Bill said all human beings are born with this desire to be secure in the future. And if we didn't have that desire, we wouldn't provide the food, the clothing, the shelter, the things that we need. And next drought season, we would just starve to death. Next winter season, we would just freeze to death. So these desires that you and I have to be secure tomorrow is a basic God-given thing. Now, just like with a social instinct, if I'm going to be secure tomorrow, I'm going to have to decide, well, what is it that I need in order to be secure? Society teaches us these things, and it varies in different parts of the world. One part of the world, you only need $4. Another part of the world, you need 4,000. Another part of the world, you need 4 million. Another part of the world, you need 192 coconuts, whatever it is, that they use to measure and trade and barter by. And based upon what we see and what we're taught, we set goals for ourselves. And we begin to work toward reaching that goal. And you're going to have to work at it. You can't be a bum and sit on your duff and be secure tomorrow. You're going to have to make some sacrifices. You can't blow it all today and be secure tomorrow. And I don't think you and I would do the work nor make the sacrifices if we didn't get a reward for doing so. The great reward comes at the moment of successful completion of the goal, and it's now mine and nobody can touch it. My God, how many of us have done it? Started out as a kid, we wanted a new bicycle. And we worked and we worked and we strived and we strived, and we finally got a bicycle that cost about $10 and enjoyed it for a little while. But after we rode the bicycle for a while, we looked around and said, hell, I'd rather have a car. So we set our goal for the new car. Then we set our goal for the new dress, for the new shoes, for the new home, for the new furniture, for the new this and for the new that, for the new business, for the new piece of property. And we work and we work and we strive and we strive and we reach the goal, and every time we reach it and nobody can take it away from us, my God, what a great feeling that is. When I was a kid growing up, hardly anybody ever owned their own home. Nearly everybody rented, and once in a great while, somebody would get enough money to make a down payment on a little old 3-room shack of some kind, and they would pay and pay and pay and pay and pay and pay, and the day that sucker was paid off, you know what we did? We had a party. We called in all the neighbors, and we celebrated by burning the mortgage. They can't take it away from us now. What a great feeling that is. The only thing wrong with it is just a temporary feeling. I no sooner get the new car and I look around and that guy right there's got a Cadillac and I'm driving a Chevrolet. This guy over here's got a Brooks Brothers suit and I bought mine at Kmart's, and it caused us to set a new goal. And we work and we work and we strive and we strive, and it seems to create within we human beings an insatiable desire for more and more and more and more and more, and we're not getting it fast enough, not giving it to us like we think they should. So what do? We take shortcuts, we lie, we cheat, we steal, we con, we manipulate, and the instant we do so, we create pain and suffering for others. They in turn retaliate against us, create pain and suffering for us. Plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success. Under those conditions, we're always in collision with people, places, and things. Third basic instinct he talked about is the sex instinct. I always have to stop and take a drink of water before I start.
He gets excited about this.
He said all human beings are born with a desire to have sex. Now, it may get turned off by bad teachings or bad happenings, but all human beings are born with a desire to have sex, because if we don't have sex, we can't reproduce ourselves. And if we don't reproduce ourselves, then sure enough, the human race is going to fail to survive. Just like the other two instincts. If you're going to reproduce yourself through the sexual act, you're going to have to work at it. You know, you can do more work in 3 minutes of sex, if you can last that long, than you'll do all day digging a ditch. Don't you older guys remember how it used to be when you got through with it? My God, you just fall over sideways. The sweat's just pouring off of you. You can hardly get your breath. You feel like you've died, gone to heaven, and come back 2 or 3 times. And I don't think you and I would do that kind of work if we didn't get a reward for doing so. And the great reward comes at the moment of successful completion of the sex act. One of the greatest feelings we can experience as human beings, both emotionally and physically. One of the greatest feelings you can possibly have. But also, just like the other two, it's just a temporary feeling. Hell, you no sooner get through with doing it than you get to thinking about doing it again. And it's such a pleasurable and such an exciting thing, the next thing you know, you get to thinking about doing it in different ways. And you get to thinking about doing it in different positions. And you get to thinking about doing it with different people. And the next thing you know, you're doing it at the wrong time, in the wrong way, with the wrong people. And the instant you do so, you create pain and suffering for others. Yeah. And they retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. Plain little life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success, because under those conditions we're always in collision with people, places, and things. God knows that these things are necessary for our survival. He also knows that we're not going to do these things if it's not pleasurable. And there's where the rub comes in. It is so pleasurable that all human beings at one time or another will overdo in one or more of these areas and create pain and suffering for other people. It's just about that simple. You know, if all human beings on earth today could fulfill these basic instincts of life at the level that God intends, there would be no conflict on earth today. But they are so pleasurable, we just can't resist overdoing in one or more of those areas and create all kind of problems with other people. And we're constantly in collision with other people. You know, every emotional problem on earth today, could be solved through these basic instincts of life if we all did them at the level that God intends for it to be. Every emotional problem stems from these 3 basic instincts of life. Now, coming out of those 3 basic instincts, you see a little circle called self. That's where self-will comes from. Trying to fulfill these basic instincts of life. And that's what causes us to think the way we think and causes us to do the things that we do. And coming out of that self circle, you see another one called wrongs. That's the word we have to look at. Somewhere in AA we got the idea that the word wrongs meant a list of dirty, filthy, nasty items. But you go to the dictionary and look it up, you'll find several definitions for that word. One definition of the word wrong is incorrect judgment of others. A little later on in step 4, we're going to find out that's exactly what a resentment is. Another definition of the word wrong is incorrect believing. A little later on in the 4th step, we're going to find out that's what most of our fears are. They're really not true. Another definition of the word wrong are the harms and hurts that we do to others. And a little later on in step 4, we're going to look at those things and see the truth behind them. Now, it's very easy to spot a selfish, self-centered human being. They will always display 3 common manifestations of self. Number 1, they're going to be madder than hell all the time. Damn him and damn her, and by God, I'll show them, and they're not going to treat me that way, and I'll get even with those SOBs, and blah, 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 blah. Selfish, self-centered human being scared to death. Can't depend on God. Can't depend on other human beings. If we're an alcoholic reaching the end of the road, we can't depend on ourselves anymore. And we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we know when it gets here, it's not going to be worth a damn, whatever it is. Absolutely scared to death. Selfish, self-centered human beings, in trying to fulfill these basic instincts of life, and in overdoing them, is always going to create harms and hurts for other people. And we're not drunken bums. We got a conscience. And the guilt and the remorse associated with those things just literally eat us up. And it's easy to see that selfish, self-centered human being. They're always mad, always afraid, and are always filled with guilt and remorse. Now, we're trying to find a way to live where we can have a little peace of mind and serenity so that we can stay sober in the future. And if we remain restless, irritable, and discontented, if we remain angry, resentful, and afraid, and filled with guilt and remorse, we don't feel good. And we're gonna exist under those conditions just so long. And the mind's going to start seeking relief. It's going to start thinking about the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a couple of drinks. Next thing you know, we become insane. And we end up drunk all over again. So we're going to have to do something about the way we think, about these things in our mind that are the result of a life lived on self-will. If God could direct our thinking, we could fulfill these instincts at the level He wants. If I direct my thinking, I'll fulfill them at the level I want, and I will always overdo. It's just that simple.
Another reason why we do this at this time is because these words that you see here, companionship, prestige, self-esteem, pride, ambitions, all those words are in and around the fourth step in the big book. Bill didn't go into great detail expected to explain them. He assumed we knew what he was talking about, but I didn't. I don't know about you, but I didn't. That third column affects my. I didn't know what was there and what was affected by it. So I just skipped over that column. You see, and that's why we do this, to get a working knowledge of these words, primarily, I think, so we can look at the third column and see what part of self is affected by the actions that we have just had with others. And when I do an inventory today, I ask the people to go to the 12 and 12, go to the first 2 or 3 or 4 pages, get a working knowledge of the basic instincts of life and these words that we're talking about, and then we can do that third column. Because I skipped over it, and most people do. That's one reason why we don't do the inventory out of the big book as it's laid out. We didn't understand what part of self was affected. When the first column and second column, those are easy. It's what part of self is affected in the third columm that we skip over, or at least I did.
Okay, we finished up now with step 3. We all did the prayer together a while ago. And now then it's time for us to go to work.
There's so much in this section, and I really hope you got something out of it. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I thought about chopping it into smaller sections, but I really felt it was kind of necessary to get all of that information out there. I do plan on doing another episode on Joe and Charlie talking about Step 4, as well as doing another roundtable discussion on Step 4. And I will be scheduling a recording for that in the next few weeks. I did want to mention that I have a couple of really cool recordings lined up. One of my friends I'll be recording tomorrow, and then next week I will be recording the Committee for Public Information and Cooperation with the Professional Community, and that will be out in a few weeks. And I also attended the Bay Area SAA and COSA quarterly speaker meeting, so I'm hoping to get the recordings from those and share those on the podcast as well. So we have quite a few episodes lined up, so stay tuned for those. And for today, since I'm recording this late on a Friday, I'm just going to end the episode here. I did get a few extra feedback emails, and I'm not going to share them here on this episode because I want to try to see if I can get this out today, but I will be sharing them in the future. And like I mentioned every week, if you want to get a hold of us and leave us feedback for the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you want to get a hold of me to possibly be a guest on the podcast or have any general questions about the podcast, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Again, I thank you so much for tuning in this week, and as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.